He had not come to make a scene. He had not come to argue or to threaten or to demand anything that wasn't already owed to him by contract and by law. He came because his daughter had a dentist appointment on Friday, and he needed to know whether he still had a job. That was the whole of it. That was everything. Raymond Cole walked into the lobby of Vantage Industrial Solutions on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a manila envelope, a work order signed in triplicate, and 14 years of his life folded into a quiet, careful kind of patience that most people would have spent a long time ago. He wore his good jacket, the navy one he kept for situations that required him to be taken seriously, and he had combed his hair and left his truck parked 2 blocks away so nobody could see the rust along the wheel wells. He was not there to beg. That needed to be said and understood before anything else. The lobby of Vantage was the kind of space that had been designed to make visitors feel small. Glass ceiling 40 feet up, marble floors the color of old money. The reception desk sat at the far end like an altar, staffed by a young woman in a blazer who looked up at Raymond with the particular expression of someone trained to assess, in under 3 seconds, whether a person belonged. Raymond crossed the floor the same way he crossed every floor he'd ever worked on, without hurrying, without hesitating, with the steady gait of a man who knows exactly where the weight is distributed. "Raymond Cole," he said, "I have a submitted compliance report under review agreement dated September 4th. I need to confirm receipt and get a status update on the contract extension." The woman typed something, looked at her screen, typed again. "Do you have an appointment?" "I do not," Raymond said. "But the agreement specifies a 45-day review window with a written acknowledgement of receipt. That window closes Thursday. I'm here to make sure the clock is documented correctly." She asked him to wait. He waited. He stood to the side of the desk with his envelope in both hands, and he watched the lobby fill and empty, and fill again with people in suits who walked through it like they owned it, because most of them probably did in some way that Raymond's kind of work had never provided access to. 14 years. That was how long Raymond had been doing contract systems work for the Vantage portfolio. Not for Vantage itself, technically, but for a subsidiary called Merrick Operational Services that sat 2 corporate layers below the name on the building. He'd started at 31, fresh off a stint doing HV diagnostics for the county, recommended by a foreman who said Raymond had the kind of hands that find problems before they become lawsuits. He'd built his own small operation over the years, just him and 2 part-timers. They kept the mechanical infrastructure of 4 Vantage-adjacent facilities running without incident, which is to say they kept it running the way lungs run, invisibly until they don't. His wife Pauline had died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, found late, gone fast, the way those things go when the insurance has gaps and the hospital is 40 minutes away, and you're spending most of your energy trying to not fall apart in front of a 7-year-old who doesn't fully understand why Mama doesn't come home anymore, but understands everything about how her father's face looks when he thinks she's not watching. Her name was May. She was 11 now. She had her mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something, and her father's habit of going very quiet when something hurt. Raymond had kept the contract going through all of it. Through the grief and the single-parent school pickups and the nights he worked until 2 in the morning, because the work was the thing he could control when everything else was moving without him. He'd kept the contract and he'd kept the quality, and when Merrick Operational Services was absorbed into the main Vantage structure 18 months ago, he'd submitted his compliance documentation on time, in full, in the format specified, and waited. The review agreement guaranteed a response within 45 days. 30 days passed, then 40, then 44. Raymond had sent 2 emails. He'd gotten 1 automated acknowledgement and 1 out-of-office reply, so he put on his good jacket and he came downtown. He was still standing near the reception desk when the elevator opened and Elliot Rourke stepped out. Raymond recognized him from the company website. Senior Vice President of Operations, which in practice meant he was the person who decided which contracts got renewed and which ones got quietly allowed to expire. He was 60-something, silver-haired, built like a man who'd been handsome once, and had decided that his current authority was an adequate substitute. He had two people with him, both younger, both carrying tablets, both moving in the practiced choreography of people who exist primarily to make one person look busy. Rourke did not see Raymond at first. Then the receptionist said something low and gestured, and Rourke looked over, and something shifted in his face. Not recognition exactly, but a kind of assessment, the same 3-second calculation, and the result was visible before he'd taken a single step toward the desk. "Mr. Rourke," Raymond said. He didn't move toward him. He held his ground. "Raymond Cole, Cole Systems Contracting. I have a compliance submission under review from the Merrick Absorption Agreement. The window closes Thursday and I haven't received written acknowledgement." Rourke stopped a few feet away. He looked at Raymond the way people look at something they've stepped around enough times, that they've stopped seeing it as an obstacle and started seeing it as part of the floor. "That's a procurement matter," Rourke said. "You'd need to go through the vendor portal." "I did go through the vendor portal," Raymond said. "In September. The portal generated a case number. The case number has had no activity in 31 days. One of the younger men with tablets started typing. "These things take time," Rourke said, already half turning away. "They do," Raymond agreed. "The agreement specifies 45 days. I'm noting, for the record, that I attempted to confirm status before the deadline and was directed to a portal that's been inactive for over a month." Rourke turned back. The thing that crossed his face then was not anger. It was something closer to mild irritation, the kind a person feels when an inanimate object behaves unexpectedly. A door that won't close, a light that flickers. "Are you here to make trouble, Mr. Cole?" "I'm here to document a delivery," Raymond said. He held up the envelope. "I'd like to hand this to someone whose receipt can be logged under the existing agreement." There was a pause. A few people nearby had slowed their walking in the way people do when they sense something about to happen, the invisible gravitational pull of a conflict that hasn't quite ignited yet. Then Rourke said, to the man on his left, "Call building security." He said it loud enough for the lobby to hear. That was not an accident. Raymond did not move. He did not raise his voice. He did not do any of the things that the moment seemed to be inviting him to do. He stood exactly where he was, and he waited because he had learned. Through years of working in systems that could injure you or kill you if you reacted before you understood what you were dealing with, that the first response was rarely the right one. Security arrived. 2 men, neither of them unkind about it. They were doing their jobs, and their job was to escort him out, and they did it with the particular apologetic efficiency of people who understood that the man they were removing had probably done nothing wrong, but that their paycheck came from the same place as the order. Raymond placed his envelope on the reception counter before they reached him. He set it down face up. He made sure the case number was visible on the label. "For the record," he said, "to no one in particular, to everyone in earshot, I'm leaving documentation of a compliance submission under contract references MC 223-417. The review deadline is October 16th. Today is the 14th. He let them walk him to the door. Behind him, he heard Elliot Rourke say something to his colleagues that he couldn't fully make out, and then he heard laughter, easy, dismissive, the laugh of a man who is entirely certain that the thing he is laughing at is finished. Raymond walked to his truck. He sat in it for a long moment. He thought about May and the dentist appointment, and the way she'd asked him last week if they were going to be okay, in that careful, too-old way she had of asking things she already suspected the answer to. He said out loud, to the windshield, to himself, "Yeah, we're going to be okay." Then he made a phone call. The person he called was not a lawyer, though what he had to say would eventually become very important to lawyers. Her name was Deirdre Okafor. She was a compliance auditor at the State Contractors Licensing Board, and Raymond had met her 3 years ago during a routine inspection of one of the Merrick facilities in which she had found, buried in the mechanical schematics, a series of ventilation modifications that had been signed off as compliant and were not. Raymond had been the one who pointed them out. He hadn't needed to. He could have said nothing, same as the last two contractors had apparently said nothing. But he'd flagged them, put it in writing, and Deirdre had noted it in her report, and his name had gone on record as the person who had kept 400 warehouse workers from breathing recycled air with elevated carbon monoxide levels for another winter. She remembered him. He told her, clearly and without drama, what had happened. He told her about the 44-day silence on a contractually obligated review. He told her about the portal with no activity. He told her about the envelope and the case number, and the way Elliot Rourke had called security loud enough to make sure the lobby heard it. Deirdre was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Raymond, I'm going to need you to forward me everything, all of it. From September 4th forward, that's already done," he said. "I sent it to you 6 minutes ago." What happened next did not happen overnight, and anyone who tells you that justice moves fast has either been very lucky or is telling a different story than the one that's true. But it moved. Deirdre's review of the Merrick absorption documents turned up something that the Vantage legal team had apparently believed was too deeply buried to surface. The compliance certification that had been filed with the state at the time of the absorption, the one that declared all existing vendor agreements had been reviewed, assessed, and properly transitioned. That certification bore a timestamp of August 30th. Raymond's contract had been submitted for review on September 4th, which meant that either the certification was filed before the review was completed, which was a procedural violation, or the review was never intended to happen at all, which was something considerably worse. The vendor portal inactivity wasn't a glitch or a backlog. The case had been flagged internally as transition closeout on the same day Raymond submitted his documentation. Someone had made a decision, and then someone had certified to the state that the process had been followed, and neither of those things was true. There were other contractors in the same situation. 6 of them, it turned out. Small operators, most of them. The kind of businesses that depended on 1 or 2 major contracts to stay afloat, who had submitted their paperwork and waited and eventually stopped waiting, because waiting was all they could do. 3 of them had already dissolved. 1 had filed for bankruptcy in the spring. Deirdre brought in the state attorney general's office in December. Raymond found out about most of this secondhand, in pieces, through a conversation with an investigator who called him on a Wednesday morning while May was eating cereal before school, and he had to step out onto the back porch in his socks to talk. The investigator asked him questions he'd already answered in writing, which he understood to mean that the written record was being verified against his spoken account, which he further understood to mean that they were building something. He went back inside. May looked up from her cereal. "Who was that?" she asked. "Work stuff," Raymond said. She tilted her head the way she did. "Good work stuff or bad work stuff?" He thought about it. "Good," he said. "I think good." The hearing was held on a Thursday in February in a conference room on the 14th floor of the state office building, in the kind of institutional beige that communicates, above all else, that the proceedings taking place within it are serious and do not require decoration. Raymond was there. He sat to the left of the table occupied by the investigators and the AG's representative, in one of the chairs reserved for witnesses and relevant parties. He wore the same navy jacket. Elliot Rourke was also there, with 3 attorneys and a woman from Vantage's communications department who was presumably there to manage whatever came next. Rourke had aged in the way powerful men sometimes age, when they encounter a system that does not recognize their authority. Suddenly, and poorly, he sat very straight, and he looked at the table in front of him, and he did not look at Raymond. The AG's representative presented the findings in the methodical, unhurried language of someone who has learned that the most damaging information lands hardest when delivered without drama. She outlined the timeline. She presented the certification document with its August 30th timestamp. She presented the internal portal records showing Raymond's case flagged as transition closeout on September 4th. She presented the communications between 3 Vantage executives, none of them Rourke, which suggested he had known precisely where not to leave a record, in which the phrase Vander Windown appeared 12 times in reference to contracts that had been, on paper, still under active review. She then presented the State Contractor Certification Statute, which required that any absorption or merger affecting active vendor agreements be preceded by completed review, not followed by retrospective certification. The distinction mattered. Legally, significantly mattered. Rourke's lead attorney asked several questions in the careful exploratory manner of someone feeling for solid ground in a room where the floor is less certain than it appeared. He got answers that were precise and documented, and which confirmed, again, that the timeline was what it was and the records showed what they showed. At one point, Raymond was asked to confirm, under the procedural framework of the hearing, that the documentation he had hand-delivered to the Vantage lobby on October 14th was the same documentation now in the record. He confirmed it. The AG's representative noted that this delivery had been witnessed by building security, by the receptionist, and by Elliot Rourke himself. Rourke's attorney said something in a low voice to his client. Rourke said nothing. The hearing concluded in the way that hearings of this type conclude. Not with a verdict, because this was not a court, but with a formal referral for civil enforcement proceedings, and a recommendation for review of Vantage's state contractor certification status, which was the kind of recommendation that tends to move quickly up the ladder of an organization's concerns. Raymond drove home in his truck with the heat running, because February in Ohio requires it, and he thought about the ventilation schematics he'd flagged 3 years ago, and how the decision to say something had felt, at the time, like the only decision available to him. Not brave, just correct. He stopped at the grocery store and bought the things May had written on the small list she'd left on the refrigerator, including, at the bottom in her careful handwriting, "The crackers I like, not the other kind." He bought the right kind. The civil case moved through the spring and into summer. Raymond retained an attorney, a man named Bert Ashby, who worked out of an office above a dry cleaner in Westerville, and who had spent 30 years handling exactly this kind of case, which is to say the kind of case where a small operator with clean paperwork has been quietly erased by an organization that counted on clean paperwork being ignored. Bert was not flashy. He was the kind of lawyer who called you back within the hour and explained things in plain language and never made you feel stupid for asking the same question twice. Raymond trusted him immediately, which was not something Raymond did quickly with anyone. The settlement negotiations began in June. Vantage had, by then, lost 2 state contracts unrelated to Raymond's situation. The certification review had turned up additional compliance gaps in their vendor management process, and the company was in the posture of an organization that wants things to stop getting worse. 3 of the other affected contractors had joined the claim. The one who had filed for bankruptcy was represented separately but on parallel grounds. Raymond was offered a number in July that was less than what Bert said he could get. He turned it down. He was offered a second number in August. He turned that down too. He was not being greedy. Bert had explained, early on, that the strength of Raymond's position came specifically from the documented timeline. The submission date, the portal inactivity, the hand delivery with witnesses, the hearing record. It was the kind of evidence that improved with patience. The final settlement was reached on a Wednesday in September, a year, and a few days after Raymond had walked into the Vantage lobby in his navy jacket with his manila envelope. The terms were confidential, as these things are, but they included the full value of the contract extension, compensation for the period of uncertainty in which Raymond had been unable to plan or commit to other work, and a provision, which Bert had insisted on and which Raymond had considered the most important part, requiring Vantage to establish a formal vendor review process with documented timelines and independently audited compliance. It would not undo what had happened to the contractors who'd already dissolved. Raymond understood that, and it sat with him in the way that things sit when you know they're true, and you can't make them not true. But it would mean that the next Raymond Cole, the next person who came in with their paperwork and their patience and their 14 years, would at least be dealing with a process that had been forced to actually exist. He told May that evening. He didn't give her the details, because she was 11 and the details were not the point. He told her that the work thing had worked out and that they were going to be okay in a way that was now a fact rather than a thing he'd said to a windshield to keep himself together. She was quiet for a moment, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, tilting her head. "Did they say sorry?" she asked. Raymond thought about the settlement language. He thought about the hearing in February and the way Rourke had sat looking at the table. He thought about the lobby in October and the laughter that had followed him out the door. "Not exactly," he said. "May considered this, but they have to do better now." "They do," Raymond said. "It's in writing." She nodded. She seemed to find this satisfactory, this accounting in the language of documents and requirements, the way her father always had. Then she went back to the math worksheet she'd been working on, and Raymond made dinner, and outside the window the light was doing what October light does in Ohio, going gold and a little melancholy, and the house was quiet in the way it was always quiet, which Raymond had learned, slowly, to receive as a kind of peace rather than an absence. On the refrigerator, held up by the magnet May had picked out at the Science Museum 2 summers ago, a small silver atom, was a list in her handwriting. New items. A different grocery run. At the bottom, just above where the paper curled slightly from the cold. "Don't forget Friday. I have the dentist." He hadn't forgotten. He never forgot.